The site, look guys, the site is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're only half here.
There were a good number walking in.
Walking.
They know the deal. They'll be
right.
okay.
We'll let them know the deal. Look, the site is. You have? Or are you going to go walk down?
I may leave 5 minutes or 10 minutes early.
To walk down?
Yeah.
To walk down. Okay.
Someone else
Got
can
your
take
ticket
the
to walk to
Okay.
go down?
I'll take Eli.
The site, maybe he has. He may have.
Oh,
I
did you
gave.
get it from
I don't know who
somebody?
I didn't give to.
Well, he hasn't made it back up here.
Coming up, I thought I gave to everybody who passed me coming up, and there were 3 who were not. So I don't know who they are. I don't know. Look, guys, the site is big enough you could spend a couple days up here wandering this and that. It's plenty big.
Have a ticket to get down.
And what I want to do is take us to a couple of 2 or 3 of the spots of the representation. You know, you sort of have the Herod idea already, yeah. And this will be the double wow factor. But throughout the time together, some to turn you loose. Want to give you 3 different storylines about the site. 3 different storylines. One, and I'll do them in this order. The story of the rediscovery of the place and why it's important today. The story about the building of the place by Herod the Great. And then the famous story, the one about the destruction of the place by the Romans. And that's the one I'm going to take exception to, the way it's told. First, the story of the building of the finding of the place. You know, unlike a lot of ancient sites that are covered over with rubble, this one never was. It never was. The buildings had fallen in, earthquakes and destruction, but they were never covered up. Never covered up. And the story about Masada was never forgotten. So you have a known event talked about in Josephus, a book people are reading for 2,000 years, and you have a place that never disappeared. That's a nice combination. The point is that nobody really paid much attention to it until the Jews come back to the land, because it represents to them a renewal of life in the land. It's a... We'll let this guy run. Thank you. It's a Hyper Alamo story, right? It's a Hyper Alamo story. The destruction of Masada in the year 73, the last stronghold of the Jews to fall in the Great Revolt, and the mountain lay empty, basically, except for a small Byzantine convent, for 1900 years, as the Jews were in diaspora, and as they came back to the land to relight the spirit of the Jewish people here. Masada became important as the last light out. Let's light the lamp again on Masada. Yeah, let's reestablish the site. There were aerial photographs taken. People knew where it was. People knew the line of the stones and that kind of thing, where the buildings were. But it wasn't excavated until the 1960s. The 1960s, and within memory of some of us. The fellow who dug it out was a guy named Yigal Yadin. We mentioned him already at Hatzor. He's the one who dug Hatzor, the big site. Yigal Yadin had been the Israeli general in charge of the War of Independence. Resigned his commission, went back into archaeology. Dug Hatzor, kind of made his name in archaeology. And then he said, it's time to give the Jews of Israel and the Jews nationwide back their greatest symbol of survival, the site of Masada. You know, is the Alamo a symbol of defeat or a symbol of life and survival?
Life
Yeah, you bet. And Masada is the same thing. Same kind of a story in a way, and the same life and survival. So Yadin came here. He used his energy as a former general, and the fame as a former general, to attract people to come and dig. He got the army to come and bring supplies to the top with a helicopter, that sort of thing, yeah, in order to excavate. And he did 3 things significant in terms of the history of archaeology. Number 1, prior to the dig at Masada here in the 1960s, all of the dig directors at all of the sites had to raise money to pay people to come and dig. It was hard work to dig, that was a paid job. Yadin said this. He said, the site of Masada is so significant that I'll bet you I can get people to come and dig for free. They'll just want to come and volunteer and dig for free. And I'll bet they even want to pay their way, you know what I mean? So we put out a call, and sure enough, from New Zealand to Denmark to America to every place, people would come. We call them volunteers. And all the other dig directors at all the other sites said, well, that was a good idea. And now, almost all of the sites are the same way. They're volunteer labeled. It comes instead of the big budget. Number one. Number two, Yadin said this, look, the site is tumbled down. We can see kind of where the lines of the walls are and things. We want this place to be, though, attractive for tourists to come. So what we need to do is we need to build the buildings back up. Yeah? You can see some of these buildings have a nice height to them now. We want to build it up, but we don't want the tourists to think that that's how we found it. So what do? What you do is you take the very same stones that tumbled down, put them back on top again, and he drew a black line. Right where the division was. You call it a reconstruction line. Everybody else in the country says, let's do the same thing. And now most sites that we visit, including Chatzor, where we were, have now this line between what was original and what is reconstructed. So we innovates that. The third thing that's significant is this. You date an ancient site, the destruction of an ancient site, the living of an ancient site, by the kind of pottery that's found. Pottery changes over time, and if you can know the date of the pottery, you know the date of the destruction. Well, until Yadin dug here, we had pottery we thought was from the 1st century, but we weren't exactly sure. What you need is a destruction layer that you can date by historic texts to that time period. So what Yadin did, he dug up here. He found that same kind of pottery throughout the site, 1st century pottery. He found that there was a destruction layer in the year 73, and now we know for sure that that kind of pottery dates to the 1st century. So when you find it in other tells that have pottery changing, now you know where the 1st century layer is. And then you can kind of backtrack or front track the rest of it. So a very significant site in terms of the history of archaeology, on the one hand, and a very significant site in terms of giving Masada back to the Jewish people, not just in Israel or worldwide. You know, every nation, every people group, every church, every institution needs to have a vision statement, needs to have a mission, needs to have images, right? Look at this nice image right here. Look at this nice image. I mean, this says to me, this is the real West right here. There's nothing that says the West more than this, yeah? This is the way it ought to be, right? You don't get away wearing a hat like this if your outfit is in Rhode Island, yeah? But you can get away with it in Texas, yeah? You got images and symbols. Every nation has them. Every people group has them. Israel has more than most because of a tremendously deep memory and history. You've got them in the national anthem. You've got them in the colors of the flag. You've got them on the back of the coins. Israel's coins have ancient symbols on them, etc., etc., etc. And Masada, in one sense, becomes the capstone symbol. The capstone symbol, like the Alamo. When I think Texas, I think Alamo. Before I think of the ranch, I actually think Alamo, because it says something about the spirit of the people. Yeah, and Masada does the same thing. So Yadin, the general who gave Israel their independence, said, "I want to also give them the capstone symbol of what this nation is. We are not going to fall again." That's the phrase. Masada will not fall again. And so you have elite units in the army carry their 40-pound pack up the snake path and do the commissioning service up here and take the vow. You have F-16s gaining speed from their Uvda air base in the southern Negev going up to Syria, and when they tear through the Rift Valley, you will often see them dipping their wings over Masada like this in salute. You have fairly wealthy families in Australia or London or New York who want to have their son bar mitzvah or their daughter bat mitzvah in Israel, and they will do it up here on Masada in the synagogue in Masada instead. The place means something. It's a, let's call it a sacred to the memory of the spirit of the Jews. All right? kind of a little bit of the energy behind the site and the refounding of it. So tourists like crazy. It's now it's a UNESCO site, heritage site. It's a sidewalk site and bathroom site, which both add to the accessibility, although it doesn't so much detract from the site, not so much.
Was it the Maccabees or Hasmoneans that kicked out Herod, and then the Romans came in and kicked them out?
No, the Maccabees were before.
Okay.
The Maccabees were before. They were Jews.
Oh, yes.
And had an independent state here, and then the Romans kicked them out, and then ruled through Herod.
Right.
And then when the Jews revolted against Rome,
Okay.
Rome had to come and take their own places out.
So it was just
To kick them
Jewish
out.
nationalists. It wasn't necessarily any Maccabee, but it was probably nationalists with the same mindset as the Maccabees, right? Nationalists.
Maccabees were nationalists.
Yes. that's
There
what I'm
were
saying.
Jewish nationalists.
Nationalists.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you have these waves in history
Mm-hmm.
where nationalism sort of crests and then peaks, and then kind of drops again, and the empires come back. You've got it here as well. We're in an age of nationalism again. Yeah. You think everybody's up?
We got five. One turn back. And
Who turned back, do you know?
Chuck, hey, are you calling him and asking him to catch a car?
Take one up or stay there.